Hello, friends. It is again a Tuesday, so we're looking at some API requests for .NET 10 now. So apparently we don't have much because we're still wrapping up the release, which is good, I guess. So we start with two easy JSON ones, and then maybe we do something more or not, depending on how Stephen and Jeremy feel about it. Eric, do you want to take it away? Does this have any impact on source generation? Do we need to do anything there, or? Yeah, don't we have some sort of thing that we have to update and sync with the reflection one, or is it just the options back?
And okay, and if I specified on a property, that overrides any setting that might be provided at the JSO level.
Yep.
So this would just be the same. This is just shorthand for doing it on all the members.
Yeah, generally speaking, for almost every piece of configuration, we have global setting, type level setting, and member levels.
And I also specify it, for example, in your example on prop B, and they differ. The one on prop B wins.
Yep.
And it's replace rather than somehow order.
Replace.
Okay. That seems fine.
And there's no unignore, is there?
There is none.
So if you put it on the type,
Yep,
everything's ignored, and there's no unignore. Which is...
Wait, there is a default.
Which just means it would always be a open, close curly.
So there's an always value and a never value. The default being never, and always means always ignoring something.
Okay, so you could on the type say ignore everything, and then on one member say never ignore, and then that one member is now serialized.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I believe that in the global setting in JSO, it actually has a check. So if you specify never in that case, it throws, basically saying, you can't ignore everything.
Is this attribute inherited?
I assume not, since it was only on properties and fields.
Well, okay, yeah, but if it's on a class now, will it be?
No, generally speaking, that doesn't happen.
When you said a different way, You have a base type and a derived type. You put this on the derived type. What state are the base type's property decals in?
So it's invariant in that sense. So whatever you put on a specific type has no bearing on its base type or vice versa.
So if I
Yes.
override a property, would it affect that, but not if I don't override a virtual property?
Overriding, yeah, that's a good question, actually. STJ has very weird semantics when it comes to resolving overloads. So when you're overriding virtual properties, and it's kind of hairy how it kind of determines what ignore condition should be used, and it kind of plays into it's too complicated basically, and we have many bugs reported around that, which at some point we'll get around to fixing. I'm guessing that in this case, we wouldn't be considering the configuration of the base type, although maybe we should. But I don't have a clear answer as to that. I'm guessing that it absolutely should. So if on the base type you're specifying an ignore condition, and that is consequently impacting the contract for the base type, then any derived type should be inheriting that condition for the values that are declared on the base type, but not for the values that it itself is declaring, if that makes sense.
All right, but if I put the attribute on the derived type, it wouldn't affect any of the properties on the base type, even if I am overriding them.
Oof. I think that it should. Like that's kind of that's my intuitive answer at this point, but I haven't actually thought about this problem.
I actually agree with that, but I was just trying to figure out how it works or how it's planned to work.
Yeah.
I mean, you would
I
only
think
honor
it's-
them. You would only honor them if you know the static type, right? It would not be a function of the runtime type. So if the property is declared as the base type, you would still use the base type's attribute.
Yeah. I think it would be nice to add a note for whoever implements this in the future, so that this is accounted for.
And then, sorry, I missed
Like
the audio
my-
settings, so I may have missed it. Did we talk about the interface yet? What it means to put on an interface?
And given the description that we just had for
The base type is the same thing.
what a virtual means, the only thing I can think of is it would affect if the property or root type is itself just typed as that interface,
Yeah.
because it's going to be the static description of how to serialize that interface.
I think that should make it, generally speaking, work nicely in the presence of diamonds. Although, that being said, we've already implemented this for other things. I would need to double check to see how that works in that case.
In principle, we are not changing anything really, right? Like logically, you're just saying when you look at a member and it doesn't have this property, check whether the declaring type does.
Mm.
Sort of a behavior we have for members wouldn't.
Yeah, and I'll basically, disregard what I said earlier. Whatever behavior we end up implementing in the presence of inheritance, virtual properties or interfaces, it would be however JSON number handling is implemented in kind of the same thing, like basically.
So JSON number handling can already be applied at the type level.
Yep. Globally, type level, member level.
Would it
looking
make
at the
s-
attribute.
Sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say that the JSON number handling attribute doesn't support interfaces. Should it, or should this not? Or like, why the difference?
I think it should be. Like if it doesn't, that sounds like an omission. Like there's nothing functionally preventing you from creating a JSON contract for an interface that differentiates it from a JSON contract for a regular POCO. Other than not being able to deserialize it, of course.
Unless it's like IEnumerable, but good luck attributing that. Would we do that then as part of this, like for consistency? Would we just like say, yeah, we're adding interface as a target for JSON number handling attribute as well, and it will behave the same way?
Yeah,
as far as inheritance goes.
I mean, now that you mention it, sure, we could try shoehorning this in, although that would require separate testing as well, just to be sure that it works as expected. I have no strong opinion.
So the only thing that kind of is odd to me in this with this type proposal is now, because I was just looking at attribute targets and I was thinking, hey, there's enum. Should we allow it to be set on the enum to control what happens when you write values of that type? And then I realized, oh, that's actually the wrong way to think about it, because we are basically saying what happens to the members, right? But I think it's conceivable that if somebody applies it to the type, what they expect to happen is if you use the type as a type of a property or a field, then it's omitted when you're saying when writing null, right? You know what I mean? That's unfortunate in the way people might interpret type level edge.
Yeah. That's a good point.
And I don't have a good answer
Json,
to that.
Yeah, I mean, again, like I was a little bit more worried about this until I saw that we already do something similar for JSON number handling, but I don't think that has the same problem you brought up, Emo. Like, because not many people are defining numeric types where they think that, wherever that, I don't know.
Yeah. For what it's worth, JSON ignore attribute is documented as prevents a property from being serialized or deserialized. We can just say, just look RTFM, but you're right that just by looking at the name, people might make that association.
I mean, the other question to ask is, would we ever want that behavior? Or do we think we would never want that behavior in the first place? In which case, if we never want it in the first place, then maybe we just accept it.
I think it's only applicable in the context of properties, because if you're serializing a JSON array, what does it mean to ignore something when it's null? Like it fundamentally changes the shape of the data that you're writing. Now, in objects, omitting a property when it's null, it's not semantically equivalent from a JSON perspective, but I can see why customers might want to skip something when it's obviously a redundant null.
To be clear, though, Emo's interpretation could still only be applicable to properties, right? It's like, are you talking about the properties on that type or the properties of that type? Those are still properties. But like, I do think it being the properties on that type is kind of the most flexible thing. Like, the only reason you'd want it to be of that type is to like kind of save yourself some lines of code, right? Like you're like, well, everywhere this shows up, I would, which is conceivable. Like it could be more convenient, but you should be able to do the same thing by just like marking each property individually if you really needed to.
I mean, I guess if we wanted to write a safer design, exposing a separate attribute might be another solution. We have too many of them in SDJ, but like if that's a huge concern, then
I mean, why did we originally design it the way we did? I assume the idea was normally you would apply this globally in the serializer options, but then you might have some special cases where you want to say, actually, in this case, no, I want you to write it now. Which seems like, why would someone want the thing in the middle where you apply it at the type level?
It's basically the same reason why you would want to specify it on the individual property, i.e., you want to enforce a specific contract for the type you're working on, and you don't want that contract to be overridden by, incidental settings that have been set by somebody else on a JSO.
So I guess I kind of get that, but like to me, it seems. Like it almost seems like you kind of want the behavior in 99% of cases that omit the thing when it's null, which kind of means like I would think specifying the opposite should be relatively rare. And so in this case, it's like I don't think I would do what you have in your sample code. I would just globally turn it off and then say, okay, there's only 4 or 5 cases in my entire thing where I really need to write a null statement for whatever reason, override the default. That seems, again, to me, it just seems odd. But I mean, I don't have any objections to it either. Like it seems, I mean, as you said, it's a pretty perfectly, I guess, interpretation of if you can apply it at the member level, you should be able to apply it at the type level to, not have to repeat yourself 100 times. But I guess to me, the reason I'm asking is because if we think of this as a global switch normally, and then you just have a per member opt out, or in rare cases a type level opt out, then I don't think people ever want the behavior that I described, because it's like, well, if you say off type, it's basically the same thing. You try to apply it more globally, but then at that point you might as well say globally, right? Because you can't really reason about the off type anyway.
Sure.
Did a customer ask for this?
Me and Steven were the customers in this case.
So I guess we should ask then, yeah, like why didn't you use the global option? Like why were you trying to, like why did you want to apply it to every property on a type versus the serializer option?
It's a library.
Yeah, so you're expecting that people are using these types with their own serializer options.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. If you build types that are serialized by someone else, then presumably at that point off type would make some sense, because then it's like, well, I control the type, I just don't control the serializer. But yeah, I guess at that point,
I mean, that you're already entering the realm of the universe stops making sense, because now you're saying I'm a library that is not serializing my own types, but I know about particular serializers and I'm going to tune the way that they work with those serializers. Like basically libraries should not care about being serialized because that's an application problem.
Yeah, if they're not the ones doing the serializing, you would think. And like it seems that the person doing the serializing should have the final say, which they kind of don't in this case. Like, because like, in this case, the nearest thing wins, right?
Well, so I mean, the problem with serialization is always like the only model we have. So basically you can tweak type level and member level information if you own the types. If you don't own the types, then the only thing you can do is global switch it, right? So that means if somebody else builds the types for you, then you're generally out of luck with serializers, because we really don't have an application model that says, configure this particular type when you serialize it, right? Which I'm not advocating we should have, but I think given that we don't have it, I do think it's reasonable to say that, if we know we built a library that, many of our customers serialize with JSON, we apply JSON attributes to them and design them to be JSON serializable. It's a reasonable thing in the middle, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can always also edit the contract APIs, but that's like a desperate solution, and we don't want users to be defaulting to that every time.
What do you mean?
Like if you don't own a type, but you still want to be able to change how it serializes to JSON, you can go into the contract customization APIs, aka JSON type info and JSON property info, and make edits on the contract that was produced by reading these attributes manually. But again, it's very advanced, and we don't want to keep steering users towards doing that, at the first opportunity. Like, we would rather this expressivity was made available by attributes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm fine
again,
with
just
it.
take something at a higher level like protobuf, right? We can't slap attributes on our types to help somebody who wants to use protobuf. If something's being explicitly designed for being used with system text JSON, as in it's part of that namespace, it makes sense that it would do things. But the fact that we're painting any of our types for, if you use the system text JSON serializer, will change the way that it works by default, feels very non-forward looking.
I mean, I guess it depends on who we are. Like, it does. Have we used these type level or property level attributes in like the BCL?
No, and I don't think we would. But I mean, where it came up for Eric and I is we're taking a type, an internal type that's just an implementation detail to be written out to on the wire in a format that a JSON format that the remote you're talking to expects. But there's other stuff there that requires the user to pass in type information, which is generally done in public API via JSON serializer options. So JSON serial option comes in with the type information for the other stuff, but you still want to control how your types that are part of the overall payload are getting serialized.
Yeah, and like regardless, like we already have these type or attributes like this that go on the type or the properties, so it's not like we're breaking new ground by
they're not
allowing
just
different things.
Quantificating.
I mean, there are always workarounds, right? There are other alternatives here. This is just about making this came up because Eric and I were looking at something. We had like 16 of these lines in one type. Like, why can we just put it at the type level?
I heard nothing to the contrary, so I would just say it seems good, I guess.
So we're keeping the same name for the type level.
Yeah, I think it's
final.
Yeah, I do think the off-type thing is... While I think it's reasonable to think that's what it means, I do think it would be very hard to reason about. And also I think that would be strange enough that if we ever wanted that, I think having a separate attribute for that would make more sense.
Yeah. I mean, for what it's worth, this library has this convention in general. Like, I can think of at least another 3 attributes that apply on the member level and apply on the type level, and it has the exact same semantics. So I'm guessing a beginner might get confused by but perhaps somebody who's seasoned might not be as confused. They will be confused by other parts of SDJ, of course, but that wouldn't be the worst one.
Yep. Sweet. One down. Go.
Okay. This is pretty much the same motivation for naming policies. So, as you know, as you may or may not know, there's a JSON naming policy abstraction that effectively provides a one-way mapping from .NET member names, typically assumed to be Pascal case renderings, mapping them out to more web-friendly formats. So camel case, kebab case, snake case is some of the naming policies that we've shipped. Now, one of the issues, again, that me and Steven identified was that at the moment, the only way you can specify a naming policy is globally, and there exists no other way. So if, again, you're kind of in the business of modeling a DTO, and you want to like explicitly apply camel case conversions for a very specific POCO, the only way to achieve that is to manually specify a custom name that follows the camel case naming convention. So this effectively proposes that we introduce a new attribute, in this case, a JSON naming policy attribute, which provides a naming policy. And you can use that to specify a naming policy again for everything contained within the type, as discussed before, or specifying it on individual properties. I don't know why you would want to do that, but I don't see why we wouldn't want to add it. You'll notice that the attribute itself exposes a couple of constructors, a public one where you specify a JSON known naming policy, that's an enum that we already have in the library, and it's a proxy value that you can actually specify on an attribute. The JSON naming policy itself is a class, so you can't actually specify it on annotations, and we've already been using that for some capabilities of the source generator. But also for user-defined extensibility, we're also considering a protected constructor that accepts a proper JSON naming policy value that might be user-defined.
And that one would not be supported by source generation then, right?
No.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it would be, I think. It would be. You just wouldn't. You would need to explicitly inherit from the naming policy and kind of plug in your own implementation. It would not be supported in the case of fast path source generation, because in that very specific case, the source generator performs that conversion for you at compile time. So in that case, and that case only, we wouldn't be able to entertain user-provided naming policies.
Yeah, the reason I'm looking confused is because I thought we said because it's dynamic, we have no way of calling it source generator, but you're saying we can, it's just no longer the fast path?
Yes. So if you go to the JSON source generation options attribute, awful. There is a.
Because I thought source generation is controlled via an attribute, so you have the same problem there. You can't plug in something that is not a literal, basically.
Yeah, but here's the thing: like, if you don't rely on fastpath, you can absolutely generate metadata that use your, custom-defined naming policy. You'll be paying a negligible, I would guess, performance penalty of having to make that transformation at one time at initialization, but other than that, it will be fully functional.
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you have confidence that this whole thing plugs nicely, then I don't have a concern with that. Like, I think if we have more and more cases where the extensibility model for naming policies don't really work super well, I would also be cool with no longer doing that. But that's up to you.
I'm generally confident in being able to build something that's coherent in this case.
Do we know of anyone who actually does have a custom naming policy? That's something we built because we could.
So before we built our own snake case and kebab case implementations, there were a number of libraries floating around in NuGet that implemented their own. We also don't have Pascal case naming policy, as far as I know. There are also libraries that implement Pascal case. So I don't know. I'm guessing that there always will be something.
Fair enough. I hear no objections. Everybody's excited for this feature.
Looks good to me. I would also just say maybe a note that we'd be okay with adding interface to number handling policy, not like a requirement, but for consistency, it seems fine.
Maybe we can try
yeah, like I'm just saying, like, you know, if for consistency, because that targets everything these last two attributes do other than interface. So it seems like an interesting omission now.
Yeah, so what Steven is proposing is updating the JSON number handling attribute class.
Exactly, and it's Stefan.
To include interface in its attribute usage attribute.
Yeah.
New rule on the team: we can only have so many Stevens and Stephens. Oh, I lost my browser window now. Here we go. What is this thing called? JSON number handling? Is that the name?
JSON number handling attribute. Linked it in chat.
There we go. I just leave a comment in there and then we file a separate issue. And I posed it as a question, so. Be cool?
Yes, thank you.
I fully expect you to come back in 3 months and tell me that none of this works. I mean, the completely different set of attributes. I'm joking, but also not really. This stuff is complicated once you walk the tail, I guess. Anyway, so should we talk about the other thing that we talked in the introduction? Or I'll be happy with just doing it. Actually, I have no context on it, so I can't intelligently even name the thing you mentioned earlier.
Okay, so for 9, we were introducing a new method. If Steve's brain loads faster than mine does, then he can take over. But we added like a string.trimEnd that takes params read-only span of char, the characters to delete. This is conflicting in name and has higher priority than common extension methods that people write, which is if I have this substring at the end of my string, I want to remove it. So they call string.trimEnd open quote XYZ close quote close paren. So we're now going to be taking over and changing the meaning of what that would do. We've decided that that's bad/risky at this stage, and we're going to remove it from .NET 9.
We had a sort of the proverbial dropping the frog in the the water thing, where we added overloads of trimEnd. I think we first added ones that took params char array, and then subsequently, which for this purpose is fine. And then when we subsequently rolled out anywhere we take a params char array and it makes sense, add a params span of char. That then causes, we just sort of did that blanketly across the board, but that then causes problems because that span now binds tighter than an extension that takes a string. And so things where they were doing trimEnd string now bind to our trimEnd span, where our span is interpreting it as individual characters rather than as a sequence to be used together. So we're going to get rid of it, and then we can add it back in the future. And if we add it back in the future, we would probably at the same time add one that actually took string that would do the quote quote right thing.
The thing that everybody's extension methods do.
Yeah.
So what is the extension method that we are removing?
We're removing an instance. We added an instance method, string.trimEnd params read-only span char. The problem is that a non-trivial number of folks have extension methods on string called trimEnd that take a string. And ours now binds tighter.
And they have different behavior.
Yeah.
Because trim chars is basically any of those versus trimEnd with a string would mean if that particular string sequence occurs, remove the sequence as a whole.
Exactly. So with ours, if you do trimEnd XYZ, it would remove from the end of a string yx, zyx, xyz, whereas theirs it would only remove if the end of it was xyz.
And then you think the fix is, if we want to add it back, it would add it back both with trim end with string and trim end with read-only span char.
I think so. We have I mean, it's already a little weird that we use we in some places we use a span of chars to mean string, like a fixed sequence, and in some place we mean basically a set. And we have some APIs where there are both char overloads and string overloads. So for example, string.split has overloads that take both a char array and a string, and those have different behaviors.
Yes.
So when we added the span-based one, it mapped to the char array.
Yes.
So I think what we would probably do, if we decided we wanted to add this back in the future, we'd probably add the string one and we'd add the span one with the char behavior. The problem would be if we just leave the span one now without the string overload, then everyone else, anyone who's calling this with a string would bind to our span-based behavior, which is the char array-based behavior, and that would effectively prevent us from ever adding the string one because we'd be changing the behavior we did.
Yeah, worst case right now, everybody is silently recompiling to a new behavior too, so.
Right.
Right. And given where we are in the cycle, the easiest thing is remove the thing that we know is breaking people instead of trying to patch the gap and see if we can unbreak people.
It's also a fine example where we violated our own guidance, right? Because it's, yes, technically you just vary by type, but you definitely have completely different behavior. So it's I mean, in some cases we have any suffix, right? Which probably we should have done in those cases as well, but.
Yeah, and this goes back
2001 or
yeah.
Yeah, no sense.
So unfortunately, it's a late break because this will break people that started calling it in the last few RC, in the last RC. But it is what it is.
Are we confident that's the only place?
No,
because I see. So have we do we do a scan for those?
but we've heard a non-trivial number of complaints about this one in particular.
I see. But then the problem still exists in the other places, and we just say like, well,
if there are any, yeah. I think part of the problem here is this is string, so it's very prominent, and B, it's expected that things on string take strings, and so it kind of amplifies the case.
Because the problem case you're describing should be pretty much every time we add an overload for read-only span of char, when one that takes string exists, is probably.
Well, this one, the interesting thing here is we don't have one that takes string for this method. It's just other people have them as extensions.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. You can't scan for something that you don't have. Yeah. Oh well. Yep, seems reasonable. I mean, there's nothing to say, like nothing to approve, but like, and it makes me always sad when we have to undo things. But it's the inverse of moving fast and break things.
Do we have a trim start that goes along with this? Presumably, it has the same problem.
That's a good question. We do have a trim start, yep, and it has, yep, it's the same thing.
And then, I don't know, what do we think about?
If you remove trim end, it makes sense to remove trim start, right? Like that seems.
Yeah. And then when did we add just trim? Has that been around for a while?
Trim. The trim that takes read-only span of char is also net new.
It is.
But that one, I believe, has an open. Actually, no, it does not.
Nope.
Yeah, all the trim ones have the same problem.
That one being like if it starts or ends with ABC feels weirder. Because it depends on how paranoid we want to be. Like, Steve, do you have a good way of finding the extension methods that people?
I just use grep.app and regex foo.
Fair enough. Just looking for a trim end of this string.
I found grep.app doesn't index nearly as many repositories as it did even like a few months ago. But yeah, still find stuff. It's useful.
But yeah, so we'll be excising trim end, trim start, maybe trim just for symmetry. Though that instinctively feels less likely to have broken somebody. And see what else I can come up with before I do the surgery.
Yeah.
Looks like we actually have some in .NET World. Arcade has a trim start extension on string that takes a string.
Which uses it as a sequence of characters?
Yep. So does Aspire.
I think that probably means you have to remove them all.
Aspire has a trim start extension method, you're saying?
Yeah.
That returns the string.
Awesome.
So, yep, and then we'll, maybe revisit in 10 if, because these got added by blanket, not by need. So,
And you're referring to like the internal one that they have?
Yeah.
Or does it matter? Yeah, okay.
I mean, whether or not the extension method is internal, them recompiling their code for .NET 9 would, an instance method will always, a viable instance method will always be any extension method, even if the extension method has an exact type match.
Right. I guess the point is like it wouldn't break anyone using Aspire necessarily. But yeah.
This is going to be fun. We're going to break WPF.
Of removing
because
it or
they
adding it?
They're actually calling the methods we're talking about removing.
Oh, sweet. So then, yeah, I guess there's a.
I mean, yeah, the number of people that will be broken by us removing it is probably lower than the number of people that will be broken by us not removing it, because
no, I'm not arguing.
Been around.
Not arguing against it. Just saying this is going to be a fun dance.
Yes, because it means now you have to work with WPF and figure out when you can remove it there. I guess you can already remove it to whatever they called before.
I mean, it's an easy code fix. It's just code flow stuff.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I just gave it a precursoring scan over a string. It seems like the trim ones are the only. But it's all three of them. Trim start, trim end.
Fair enough. So anyway, that's happening.
And then we need to break and change notice too, right?
Yep.
Cool.
It'll be a weird one of, it doesn't apply, it's not a breaking change from 8 to 9, but it's a breaking change from 9 to 9.
Yeah, from RC, whenever this showed up, RC1 or something to GA.
Yeah, and I've now found somebody with a trim of this string that calls trim start and trim end. So
Okay.
Yep. So yep, all three are known to break at least one person.
We'll fix up. We can fix up all the ones we know about in our own house, and then hopefully few people have actually taken dependency on the new, likely unexpected behavior, and will end up not breaking as many people as we otherwise would have.
Yep.
Yep. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And then this is it for today. Then I see you guys next week.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.